All right, so I'm recording right now. We're going to talk about Chapter 18 on the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is basically a branch of your nervous system that's involved with helping to regulate homeostasis or internal balance. So in this chapter, what we're going to do is focus on a comparison of your autonomic nervous system to other nervous systems like the somatic motor system. We'll go over the divisions of your ANS or autonomic nervous system, like the parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions and the functions and structures of each. We'll go over some other features of the ANS as well as what parts of the brain control the autonomic nervous system, because it's a branch of your peripheral nervous system, but it's controlled by parts of the brain. So we'll talk about those brain areas that play an important role in maintaining homeostasis through autonomic nerve pathways. So the autonomic nervous system is one that is regulated by an unconscious level. So we say that it's subconscious. The autonomic nervous system is also called the automatic or visceral nervous system because it automatically controls your visceral organs. Like your internal organs are controlled by your autonomic nervous system in a very automatic way. And so an example of this is, we don't have to think about having our stomach contract to force food into the small intestine. And we don't have to think about our heart beating at a certain rate. Luckily, these internal organ functions are controlled independently of our conscious thought. So what's nice then is that homeostasis is regulated by the autonomic nervous system at a subconscious or unconscious level so that we can use our brain power to consider other things. Like instead of having to worry about whether or not our heart's beating right now or whether or not food's being digested, we can use that brain power for other things, like maybe contemplating our place in the universe, or just thinking about what we want for lunch. But that works. So the autonomic nervous system is similar in structure to the somatic nervous system. However, the somatic nervous system is what's conscious, and it's involved with controlling skeletal muscle, whereas the autonomic nervous system is controlling smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. We talked about this back earlier in one of the nervous system chapters. Now, if we look at a comparison of the somatic and autonomic nervous systems, what we find then on the left here is the somatic nervous system. On the right is the autonomic nervous system. So the somatic nervous system has neurons, which are nerve cells, that basically will either pick up information from like skin and joints and fascia and carry that towards the central nervous system. So what's the word we use for information going to the central nervous system? Afferent. So afferent is sensory. So part of your somatic nervous system is sensory information. Remember, the somatic sensory system is sensation from skin, muscle, joints, and fascia. So that's why you feel your body, because somatic means body. So you can feel like your skin and joints and the stretch of fascia around your body. So information might be carried towards the spinal cord, where it's transmitted to the brain for conscious perception. Or you can have motor neurons that exit through the ventral horn of the spinal cord, through the spinal nerve, out to some sort of peripheral nerve, where that connects to a muscle, like let's say biceps brachii, to help like flex your arm at the elbow, right? But this is under conscious control. So if it's part of your somatic motor system, then it's consciously controlling skeletal muscle, okay? Now for the autonomic nervous system, though, we find we still have sensory and motor components. So the visceral sensory system has sensory neurons that then go back towards the spinal cord. What's involved with visceral sensation, which is unconscious, right? So like stretch of certain internal organs, or the pH of your blood, or the let's say the oxygen content of your blood, or blood pressure. Like all of these things are actually unconsciously being sensed by the visceral sensory system, which is a branch of your autonomic nervous system. Now, we also have autonomic motor neurons. And so most of what we'll talk about today, you guys, is the autonomic motor division. So if it's autonomic nervous system, is that conscious or unconscious? Unconscious, right? So if it's unconscious, what type of muscle is it going to control? Smooth and cardiac and glands, right? But the way, when we say glands, you guys, really it's controlling the smooth muscle and glands, so that when you actually squeeze on the smooth muscle in a gland, it actually squeezes the secretion out. That's what this is doing. So the autonomic nervous system controls smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands through a series of neurons. And how it differs from the somatic nervous system is that, well, for one, we actually have multiple neurons in the pathway. For the somatic motor neurons, we had one long motor neuron that goes out to a skeletal muscle. In the autonomic nervous system, we actually have multiple neurons in the pathway. So you can have a preganglionic neuron who has its cell body in the ventral horn of the spinal cord, and a postganglionic neuron who has its cell body in the the ganglia somewhere in the peripheral nervous system, and then an axon that would continue out to some smooth muscle, let's say in your respiratory tract. So you have multiple neurons in this pathway, and you might wonder why. What's the point of having several neurons along the chain of events here versus just having one long neuron that goes out to skeletal muscle? What do you guys think is the significance of that? Having multiple neurons in this pathway for the autonomic nervous system.
Send a signal to multiple destinations.
I like that. You can send a signal out to multiple destinations, because what if a neuron, the preganglionic neuron, communicates with multiple postganglionic neurons, and then those can actually diverge out to multiple tissues? And that's absolutely correct. That can happen. And then you mentioned too, that what if there's damage and you want to get around that route of damage? Well, by having multiple neurons in the pathway, there might be multiple ways to get to smooth muscle and cardiac muscle if a nerve gets cut. That's a good thing. And it makes sense from the standpoint of keeping your body alive, right? Because think about how important your cardiac muscle is to your survival. Or think about how important smooth muscle is to your survival. In fact, where do you find smooth muscle? Hollow organs, right? So what are some hollow organs? Yeah, digestive tract, respiratory tract, urinary and genital tracts, right? And your blood vessels. So your blood vessels have smooth muscle too. So it's all involved with like transporting material or regulating pressure and that kind of stuff. So it's very important for our survival. So that's why the autonomic nervous system has multiple neurons in the chain here. That way there's, first of all, more regulate. It's easy to regulate this, and there's also backup plans or redundancy if some nerve fibers get cut. Now, both the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system use sensory and motor neurons, but in the in the somatic nervous system, somatic motor neurons innervate skeletal muscle fiber that cause conscious voluntary movement. Now, can we consciously control our heart muscle? No. Like if I asked you guys to stop your heart, you couldn't do that, right? Nor could you consciously cause your heart to speed up. However, you can change your emotional state, which can cause your heart rate to slow down or speed up. Like if I asked you guys to slow down your heart rate and then you meditated, that would slow your heart rate down. Or like just thinking about something calming, right? Or if I asked you guys to speed up your heart and then you thought about something that was frightening or exciting, then your heart rate could speed up, right? But that's not under conscious control. You're actually indirectly controlling cardiac muscle through emotional processes, but you can't consciously cause your heart to just stop beating. So the autonomic nervous system then innervates cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands through automatic or unconscious control. And what's interesting too, guys, is that with the somatic nervous system, somatic motor neurons can only excite skeletal muscle. You can't inhibit skeletal muscle. The only thing that you can do is use it as a motor neuron to excite skeletal muscle to contract. You can't actually inhibit skeletal muscle from contracting peripherally. Okay, that differs from the autonomic nervous system because your ANS can excite or inhibit these muscles and glands. So it's actually more regulated. Like you don't only just turn things on, you can also have neurons that are active and actually will act to turn off smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands, which is actually pretty cool. So this is how your heart rate could be regulated in the sense that you can maybe excite your heart to speed up, or you can actually have neurons that cause your heart to slow down. So that you actually have it on both sides, which means that it's actually more tightly regulated, and it makes sense from the standpoint of homeostasis, keeping your body alive. You want it to be more regulatable. So in the somatic motor system, we have a single lower motor neuron that has its cell body in the ventral horn of the spinal cord. That axon exits the spinal cord, goes through the ventral root into the spinal nerve, out to some sort of peripheral muscle, right? And it's going to be skeletal muscle. Now, it's uninterrupted along the whole length, and there's only one long axon that goes directly to that muscle. So what does this mean then if that axon gets cut? Yeah, that basically that neuron can't connect in any other way, right? So the muscle might be paralyzed. That's actually one form of muscle paralysis, is if your nerves get cut and you don't have axons that go out to the skeletal muscle, then they can't contract. Now this differs from the autonomic nervous system because you have at least a 2-neuron chain of events. You have a preganglionic neuron and a postganglionic neuron. And the reason why they're named this way is that the ganglia is a collection of neuron cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system, right? So if it's called a preganglionic neuron, this is before the ganglia, right? So the preganglionic neuron here has its cell body in the lateral horns of the spinal cord or in nuclei within your brain. So some cranial nerves carry autonomic information, and many thoracic spinal nerves carry autonomic information. But remember, we said that in the spinal cord, in the thoracic region and like the superior lumbar region, you found lateral horns. Remember, the lateral horns contain the cell bodies of autonomic neurons, but more specifically now, lateral horns contain the cell bodies of preganglionic neurons. Their axons then exit the spinal cord through the ventral root. They go out through spinal nerves and then synapse on a postganglionic neuron somewhere in the peripheral nervous system. So for the autonomic nervous system, we actually have collections of postganglionic neurons, like bundles of cells, nerve cells, elsewhere in the body. They can either be close to the spinal cord, or they can be very far from the spinal cord, like on or in the target organ. But basically, the preganglionic neuron communicates or synapses with the postganglionic neuron or ganglionic neuron elsewhere in the body. So you have at least a 2-neuron chain of events, which means that there's more steps, which means it might take longer to get a response, but it's also more regulatable in the sense that there are more steps in the chain of events that lead to a response, by your nervous system. So what this example here is showing you guys is just for the structure of your autonomic nervous system generally, we're going to have a preganglionic neuron with a cell body in the spinal cord, right? The lateral horn. But it could also be a preganglionic neuron with a cell body somewhere in the brain, because not all autonomic nerves come from the spinal cord. Some can come from the brain too, okay? But anyways, we'll have a preganglionic neuron with a cell body here. We have an axon that exits the spinal cord, and that goes on and then synapses or communicates with a neuron you find in a ganglia. So what was the definition of our ganglia? It's a group of cell bodies, neuron cell bodies, in the peripheral nervous system, right? And if it's what constitutes the peripheral nervous system? You got it. Outside of the brain and spinal cord. If it's any nerve tissue that's beyond the brain and spinal cord, it's the peripheral nervous system. So a ganglia then is a collection of neuron cell bodies somewhere in the peripheral nervous system. Think of these ganglia as like little mini brains, because each one of these is just a big old collection of neurons. So it's kind of odd to think about that we have lots of little mini brains elsewhere in our body, but those little mini brains or ganglia can communicate with the rest of your nervous system, in a variety of ways. But you find these ganglia, in certain areas, like they can be close to your spinal cord, they can be farther away. But anyways, you're going to find the cell body here in the ganglia, because that's what a ganglion is. A ganglion is a collection of neuron cell bodies somewhere in the peripheral nervous system. Then we call this the postganglionic neuron. And that has an axon that then goes out away from the ganglia and then synapses on cells of an organ. So this is showing an example of like the smooth muscle of your gut. So what do you guys think this is small intestine, by the way. So what do you guys think your autonomic nervous system could do to your small intestine? Like why would you want your nervous system to even communicate with your small intestine? Yeah, I like that. To maybe stimulate muscle contraction to push food through. Exactly. But are you always stimulating muscle contraction to push food through? No. So what else could this do? It could inhibit it. You're right. It could stop it. It could prevent it from contracting. So what's interesting, you guys, is that we actually have different branches of our autonomic nervous system that have opposite or antagonistic effects. One branch might connect to the smooth muscle of your gut and cause the smooth muscle to be excited and contract to force food along, right? Another branch of this autonomic nervous system might connect to the smooth muscle of your gut and actually prevent muscle contraction, to prevent digestion, because you don't want to always be digesting, nor do you want to never digest. Like you want to digest when it's appropriate, but not always. So it's controlled by your autonomic nervous system. So what's this neuron here, you guys? This one's preganglionic neuron. And then it synapses with a postganglionic neuron, right? But where's the cell body of our preganglionic neuron? Either in the lateral horns of the spinal cord or somewhere in the brain. Somewhere in the brain, exactly. And then where do we always find the post-ganglionic neuron?
Outside of the spinal cord.
Yeah. In a ganglia, somewhere outside of the spinal cord, right? Now, the ganglia can either be close to the spinal cord or it could be actually on or in an organ. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So what this slide shows you guys in is a comparison of somatic and autonomic nervous systems. Now, is the somatic nervous system voluntary or involuntary? Voluntary. And what does it control? Skeletal muscle. You got it. How about the number of neurons in the pathway? Which one has more, the autonomic or somatic? Autonomic. Good. And what was the significance of that? If it has more neurons.
Creates more regulation.
Yeah, it's more regulatable, right? If by having more steps, there's more things you can modify and change to make this a more dynamic form of regulation. It's not as simple as on and off. It could be like varying degrees of amplitude. Like it could be really strong or just kind of strong, because by having many steps, you can change it in more dynamic ways. Not just having like on and off switch here. So by having more neurons in the pathway, it's more regulatable. How about for sensory input? What type of sensory input is involved with your somatic nervous system? So skin. What else? Special senses. What else we got? For the somatic. Remember, somatic means body. So what else can we sense about our body? Touch, which is skin, right? So touch, temperature, pain, vibration. You feel it with your skin. What else can you feel about your body? Pressure in skin. What about if you close your eyes and yeah, your body's position, right? Like you understand where your limbs are, even if your eyes are closed, because you don't need your eyes to see where your limbs are. You can feel where your limbs are. That's part of your somatic nervous system. What does your autonomic nervous system pick up? Like what type of sensory information does the ANS pick up? It's afferent because it's sensory. Visceral senses, right? Are these conscious or unconscious? Unconscious, right? So what might be some unconscious information that our ANS is picking up about our guts?
Hunger.
Well, hunger is conscious, but yeah, blood pressure is a good example, right? Yeah, heart rate, maybe body temperature, that kind of stuff. So it's a great point. Now, what about ganglia, you guys? Do you find ganglia for the somatic nervous system? Not mostly. Now, sometimes you might find like a posterior root ganglia, which is which has sensory neurons, or sensory ganglia sometimes for cranial nerves. But for the most part, there's not a lot of ganglia with the somatic nervous system. But you do find a lot of ganglia for the autonomic nervous system. Whether they're close or far from the spinal cord, they're there. And then what about the effector organs of the somatic motor system? What's the somatic motor system going to attach to? Skeletal muscle, right? How about the autonomic nervous system? Cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. You might wonder, what do you mean by glands? Well, glands can be exocrine or endocrine, right? So it could be glands like salivary glands, or it could be glands like endocrine glands that release hormones. But basically those kinds of glands, and sweat glands. How about the type of response? Can the autonomic nervous system, is it only excitatory, or can the ANS be excitatory and inhibitory? It's both, right? How about the somatic motor system? Only excitatory, you got it. So the somatic motor system can only excite skeletal muscle. You can't inhibit skeletal muscle, peripherally. Your brain can actually prevent, information from being sent out. But once the information is going to the skeletal muscle, it's only going to be on. You can't actually have information that's off. It's always contract, not information that says don't contract, which is interesting. Now the neurotransmitters are different too between the two systems. So for the somatic nervous system, we have acetylcholine, which is a major neurotransmitter. And then for the autonomic nervous system, we have a variety of neurotransmitters. And what was the function of a neurotransmitter? You got it. It's a chemical message, right? And how do these neurotransmitters get released from a neuron onto the next neuron? What's this, you guys? No. You got vesicles. How do the vesicles get out of the cell? Exocytosis. Nice. You read it. So it's exocytosis of neurotransmitter-containing vesicles, gets that neurotransmitter out of the cell, and then can bind to receptors on the next cell. And then the axon properties, you guys, well, for one, our somatic motor neurons have a very thick myelin sheath. So what does that tell us about the speed of action potential propagation for somatic motor neurons? It's fast. You got it. For the autonomic neurons, you guys, they either have a very thin or scant myelin sheath, or it's missing. So what does that tell us about the action potentials for the autonomic nervous system? More slow, exactly. I mean, they're still fast, but they're relatively slower than the somatic motor neurons. Like, it could be that a somatic motor neuron can transmit an action potential at like 360 feet per second, whereas an autonomic neuron might only transmit it at 3 feet per second, which is still pretty fast as far as our body's concerned. So, something to keep in mind.